The most overrated and underrated win by every UFC champion right now. That's what I want to discuss in this video. There are some wins in UFC fighters' careers that they get a ton of credit for and everybody glazes them over it. I would consider those overrated. And there are some wins where they didn't really expect, or a lot of people look over what they did to that certain opponent and nobody really gives them credit for it. That would be the underrated win. So yeah, let's get right into it, guys. Starting off with Islam Makhachev, and I think his most overrated win personally is Alexander Volkanovski won, not the second fight, the first fight. Now, I know this is going to sound crazy because Volkanovski is one of the greatest fighters to ever do it, and he was the pound-for-pound #1 at the time. But hear me out. What people forget about in this matchup was the narratives going into the fight, right? The narrative by a lot of MMA creators, Lucas Tracy and other people, was that Volk was going to get destroyed. Volk was too small for Islam. Volk was going to get out-grappled and easily submitted by the bigger guy in Islam Makhachev. There's no way little 5'6" Volkanovski is going to be able to do anything to Islam. Islam's going to win it easily. Not to mention, I believe Islam was like a 3-1 or 4-1 favorite. Some insane odds for facing the pound-for-pound #1 at the time. And man, boy, did he almost lose this fight. I know it was in Australia and he had the issue with the IV and everything with his weight and the window to make weight. I understand all that, but Islam Makhachev had the toughest fight of his entire career versus Alexander Volkanovski. And the reason I say this win is overrated is not because Volkanovski is not skilled, but more so because of the narratives going into the fight that Islam was going to destroy Volk and it would be an easy win. People forget, man, that was the narratives going into this fight, that Volkanovski was going to be nothing more than an easy win for Islam Makhachev, and it was anything but that. And if you scored this fight as a whole versus round by round, you can argue that Volkanovski won the fight. However, round by round basis, I did think that Islam Makhachev won the fight 3-2, but the picture of Volkanovski being on top of Islam Makhachev around 5, just raining down punches, was something that nobody could have predicted. So yes, I think that Islam Makhachev's win over Alexander Volkanovski is slightly overrated. And for his underrated win, you know, you could go Dan Hooker or you can go Renato Moicano. I'm going to put it over Renato Moicano because, in the words of a lot of people, who does that to Renato Moicano? Nobody does that. Nobody steamrolled Moicano like that on the ground ever. Islam Makhachev made Renato Moicano look like he never grappled a day in his entire life, and it was very impressive. And I know that I always put it as an asterisk on his resume that he beat Moicano, but at the end of the day, Islam Makhachev did what he was supposed to do against Renato Moicano. He went out there, right, and he absolutely destroyed him. Like, he went out there, it looked like he got dropped in the beginning of the fight, but he didn't. He slipped, he got pushed down, he slipped, he got right back up. He shot a takedown, he got it, and then he ended up cinching up a Darce choke and put Moicano to sleep and made him tap. And it's very impressive. Nobody else in the entire UFC has been able to do that to Moicano. He's been TKO'd, but he's never been dominated and easily dispatched on the ground as when Islam Makhachev did it. On a day's notice of switch of opponent, by the way. And Moicano did have a full camp. So, yes, I think Islam Makhachev's most underrated win, in my opinion, is Renato Moicano. Moving on to Dricus Du Plessis. Who is his most overrated and underrated win? In my opinion, overrated. Sean Strickland is the most overrated win for Dricus Du Plessis. Listen, Sean Strickland has a very limited skill set, right? He doesn't really engage in the grappling much. He's not a wrestler. He's not even what I would say a striker. He's not even a kickboxer. Sean Strickland is a boxer. It's literally what he does. He throws teeps and jabs the entire fight. I know it's become a meme amongst the UFC community, but he throws teeps and jabs. He's very good at what he does. But if you can get past the teeps and jabs of Sean Strickland, he's not that hard of a fight. Alex Pereira showed that you can knock him out on the feet if you can just get past his little goofy iCarly stance. And I feel like Dricus gets a lot of credit and a lot of glaze for beating Sean Strickland when in reality, if you're a well-rounded fighter, you should be able to school Sean Strickland. I know I'm going to sound like a casual and people aren't going to like that, but I don't think beating Sean Strickland is all that impressive if you're Dricus Du Plessis with his skill set. Dricus Du Plessis is one of the most well-rounded fighters ever in the middleweight division, from the striking to the grappling to the wrestling to everything, the jiu-jitsu. And saying that Sean Strickland's one of his best wins whenever Sean Strickland literally has boxing and teeps, that's it. It's like, okay, Dricus got past that and he barely got past it, and people act like the wins over Sean Strickland are the best of his career. I don't know. I look at the Dricus Du Plessis win over Sean Strickland a little bit overrated. It's a good win. Beating Sean Strickland is not easy, considering he does have really good defense. But I think it's a little bit overglazed. His most underrated win, in my opinion, is Robert Whittaker. Listen, people forget, man, another narrative going around similar to the Islam versus Volk fight was that Robert Whittaker was going to absolutely school Dricus Du Plessis. Robert Whittaker was going to light him up on the feet, make it look easy. There's no way that Mr. Looney Tunes, Dricus Du Plessis, goofy striker, gassing out, or at least that's how it appeared, is going to do anything to the clean and crisp striker that is Robert Whittaker. And everybody was wrong because Dricus went in there, and sure, he got taken down in the first round versus Whittaker. But in the second round, man, he just ran through Whittaker and made it look easy. He destroyed Whittaker. I think he even took Whittaker down or sweeped him at the beginning of the first round. Then the second round, he just beat up Whittaker until Whittaker eventually showed up and just quit and took a TKO loss. So, and nobody really talks about it. How often do you hear people say, man, DDP destroyed Whittaker? How good is he? Like, nobody ever talks about this. They talk about Chimaev destroying Whittaker in a round, but when it comes to DDP, I don't hear many people saying, man, how good is Dricus Du Plessis? He ran right through Robert Whittaker. I think it's one of his more underrated wins in his career, and not a lot of people talk about it. So, yes, I have Robert Whittaker as DDP's most underrated win. Moving on to Merab Dvalishvili. Who is Merab Dvalishvili's most overrated win? I think this is going to be Jose Aldo. Whenever you hear the talks of Merab, like, oh, dude, Merab has so many legends on his resume. He has Aldo, he has Cejudo, all these guys. I think that the Aldo win is massively overrated when you look at what happened in the fight, because honestly, looking at the fight, I didn't look at Merab as like this significantly better fighter than Jose Aldo. I didn't. Merab was able to beat Jose Aldo by, and I'm not even kidding, by holding him against the fence. No damage done, no takedowns. He went 0 for 16 on takedowns. He literally held Aldo against the fence and did absolutely nothing. So him even getting credit for this win is kind of a joke because he didn't really do anything to deserve the win. And I'd be honest, I would have been happy with a no contest in this fight. I'm memeing, obviously, but I don't know, man. The performance against Aldo was so lackluster. It was so unimpressive. He literally did no damage. He got no takedowns. He literally held Aldo against the fence and stalled the fight for 15 minutes. And he gets so much credit for this win. Like, oh my God, dude, Merab has a win over Aldo. Like, how insane is he beating all these former champions? And it's like, come on, dude. He didn't do fuck all against Aldo. It wasn't a good performance. It was a terrible performance. So I think that Merab's win over Aldo and how he gets chunked in his resume to make his resume like way bigger than what it is a bit overrated when you consider the context of the fight. His most underrated win, I think, is Sean O'Malley. Listen, coming into the Merab fight, Sean O'Malley was basically undefeated in the UFC. I know he had the loss to Cheeto, but that was kind of a fluke with his perennial nerve. He proved in the rematch that he absolutely schooled Cheeto across 5 rounds. And people don't talk about Merab running through O'Malley. People just assume Merab's going to beat him in the rematch because he already beat him. But I still don't think Merab gets a lot of credit for the O'Malley win. In fact, more people glaze the fact that O'Malley won round 5 against Merab and could have seen the fight for O'Malley 1, 3, and 5 or whatever rounds than they do Merab able to neutralize O'Malley's striking, which nobody in the entire UFC has been able to do. He was able to neutralize the striking of Sean O'Malley, consistently take him down and close the distance, despite being at an extreme reach disadvantage and height disadvantage. He was able to do that to O'Malley, and I think that's extremely impressive, and it doesn't get the praise it deserves because a guy like Merab is literally tailor-made to get KO'd by a guy like Sean O'Malley. Like, he really had the game plan and come up with a really smart fight and implement the closing the distance correctly without getting caught by O'Malley like Aljo did, not rushing in, not like trying to take Sean O'Malley down at the wrong time. You know, he really had to be calculated in his approach to beat O'Malley. And that showed because Merab looked like a completely different fighter in the O'Malley fight than he did versus Umar, you know. He was a lot more safe and calculated. So I think that the win versus O'Malley, given how dangerous of a style matchup O'Malley is for him, is very underrated. And I think he should get a little bit more credit for it because a lot of people really don't talk about it. People just look at, oh, but dude, Merab's cardio machine, he beats everybody. But look at his individual wins. Sean O'Malley is an underrated win in my opinion. Moving on to Jack Della Maddalena, the fresh new champion. He just recently won the belt off of Bilal Muhammad, and it was a good performance. You know, Jack Della Maddalena showed that his takedown defense isn't as bad as it looked in the Gilbert Burns fight. But with that being said, I think Gilbert Burns is his most overrated win. Listen, people talk about, dude, how good is Jack Della Maddalena? Like, people say he was getting dominated by Gilbert Burns. Go back and watch that fight. He was not getting dominated. And although I will agree he wasn't getting dominated in rounds 1 and 2. He was losing the fight, and Gilbert Burns was having his way with him in the first 2 rounds. It wasn't complete total domination. Jack had his moments. He was scrambling. He was hitting Gilbert Burns on the feet here and there, but People talk about this win like Jack Della Maddalena, dude. He got taken down by Gilbert Burns, but outside of that, he completely schooled him and destroyed him in the third round. And while I do agree it was impressive that Jack was able to get out of the grappling of Burns and eventually secure a TKO in round 3, let's not pretend like he didn't arguably lose round 1 and 2, and he was kind of getting schooled in that fight. And that's part of the reason why a lot of people were picking Belal Muhammad to beat him, is because, dude, if Gilbert Burns can do that to Jack, imagine what Belal can do. But either way, I think the aspect of this win that's overrated is people saying that Jack like dominated the fight outside of getting takedowns. I hear that narrative. I don't know if you guys have heard it. I've heard it. I disagree with it. So I think the win over Gilbert Burns, especially when you consider Burns was on a 2-fight losing streak at the time, arguably still past his prime, I think this is his most overrated win. Underrated, I'm going to go Randy Brown. People forget, man, Rude Boy, I think, is like 8-1 or 8-2 in his last 10. Randy Brown is on a bit of a career resurgence. And Jack Della Maddalena, I think, might have been the last guy to beat Randy Brown. I know it was Brian Battle, but let's be real, that was kind of a robbery. He should have won that fight over Battle. But Randy Brown became the first guy to KO Nicholas Dalby. So Jack's win over Randy Brown is becoming it's aging really well. And I personally think that Jack Della Maddalena submitting Randy Brown should have been a sign to the division that, hey, this guy can grapple. Because if you guys don't remember, he rocked Randy Brown in round 1, I believe, and then he was able to secure a rear naked choke. Who submits Randy Brown, first of all? I don't think Randy Brown's been submitted in the UFC outside of JDM. Correct me if I'm wrong. Has anyone else submitted Randy Brown? I know he's been KO'd by Nico Price, but listen, man, Randy Brown's on a bit of a resurgence. JDM being able to go out there and just run through Randy Brown when no one else has really been able to do that is very impressive. Like, even the fights that Randy Brown loses or lost in his career, he's had moments, he's had moments where like maybe, Randy Brown's in there and then he's out of there. It's a bit different. JDM just kind of ran right through him and schooled him and made it look easy. So I think this is JDM's most underrated win. And a lot of people don't even know that JDM has a win over Randy Brown earlier in his UFC career. Moving on to Alexandre Pantoja, his most overrated win, in my opinion, it's got to be Kai Asakura. Listen, and the reason I'm calling this win overrated is because after he beat Kai Asakura, people were like, man, how disrespected is Pantoja? He needs to go up in the pound-for-pound rankings. Like, he just destroyed this guy from another promotion, like, made it look easy. Well, guess what? Kai Asakura had never fought in the UFC, and he was like 3-2 in his last 5. So to pretend that Pantoja should skyrocket in the pound-for-pound rankings from number 11 or number 10 all the way up to like number 5 because he beat Kai Asakura, in my opinion, is delusional. Like, I'm sorry. This is the win that he got that everybody started saying, dude, Pantoja disrespected in the pound-for-pound rankings. How's he number 10? How's he number 10? You beat Kai Asakura. You destroyed him. Like, yeah, great. You did what you were supposed to do as a UFC fighter. You destroyed the guy coming from another promotion. But I don't think that propels you up the pound-for-pound rankings because the guy had no wins in the UFC, and he wasn't even undefeated in the other organization he was in. I mean, come on, man. I think that people were glazing Pantoja a little too much over this win, and a guy, like I said, who had never fought any top competition in the UFC, and even outside the UFC, couldn't even hold a win streak. So I think this win for Pantoja is a little bit overrated. He did what he was supposed to do. As I said, he went out there and he dominated, and he submitted Kai Asakura outside of a close moment with a flying knee. But yeah, in my opinion, people glazed this win a little too hard in terms of like thinking he should move up in the pound for pound. And also his most underrated win got to be Manel Kape. People don't even know that he has a win over Manel Kape. This was earlier in Manel Kape's UFC career. He faced off against Pantoja, and I think Pantoja, I don't remember the fight vividly, I'll be honest. I think Pantoja was able to just easily out-grapple him over the 3 rounds. But if you look at Manel Kape's career in the UFC, who has he lost to? He's lost to Magomed Ankalaev, who's undefeated, and Pantoja. Has he lost to anybody else in the UFC? I don't think so. Maybe one more loss, but Manel Kape's been on a bit of a tear lately. I think he's on a little bit of a win streak since he lost to Makhachev. So, and if he beats Royval, that win's going to age very well, and he might find himself in a rematch with Pantoja. So I think the fact that most people don't even know that Pantoja has a win over Manel Kape and how dangerous and good of a striker Manel Kape is, I think this is his most underrated win as a champion. Moving on to Magomed Ankalaev, his most overrated win. It's not really a win. It's more so a draw. It was against Jan Blachowicz. Listen, Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev went to a draw back in, I think, 2022, and this was for the undisputed belt whenever I think Jones had vacated. This was for the, or it wasn't whenever Jones vacated. It was whenever Yuri vacated. My mistake. Yuri vacated the belt because he was injured, and they did Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev for the belt, and it ended up in a draw. Let me tell you why I think this win is overrated. People talk about this fight like rounds 1, 2, and 3 didn't exist. The only thing they remember is, oh, dude, Ankalaev completely destroyed Jan Blachowicz in that fight in the third and fourth. Like, he destroyed him. And to be fair, he did win the 2 rounds very obviously dominantly on the ground, but people were talking about him like his face looked like it went through a meat grinder, like it was all butchered up. Dude, look at Jan Blachowicz's face after that Magomed Ankalaev fight. He wasn't super damaged or destroyed or like beaten the hell out of, if you know what I mean. I'm sorry, dude. I think the narrative that he destroyed Jan Blachowicz in this fight is a bit overrated. People don't talk about how the reason he had to resort to grappling was because Jan Blachowicz was chewing his legs up so bad. How good is Jan Blachowicz's leg kicks, by the way? Alex Pereira couldn't do the same. He was hitting shin on shin with Magomed Ankalaev and making Magomed Ankalaev literally limp around the octagon in rounds 1, 2, and 3. And then eventually Ankalaev had to resort to grappling. So the reason I say that this win specifically is overrated for Ankalaev is just for the simple fact that people talk about this fight like Jan Blachowicz got dominated the entire fight, or like the only thing that matters was round 4 and 5. So I think that this fight as a whole was overrated for Ankalaev, and people were talking about how Ankalaev got robbed whenever, in my opinion, he clearly lost rounds 1, 2, and 3, and you can argue a 10-8 in rounds 4 and 5 for Ankalaev. So I think a draw was the correct answer. If anything, Jan Blachowicz should have won the fight. I don't think Ankalaev won this fight. If anybody should have got the win, it was Jan Blachowicz. So I think this performance in general from Ankalaev was a little bit overrated. And his most underrated win, well, I don't think he has one. I'm going to be honest. I was looking through Ankalaev's resume throughout his career. He doesn't really have any underrated wins, man. He got dropped by an aging Thiago Santos. That wasn't a good look. Sure, he beat Johnny Walker, but it's Johnny Walker who has no chin, you know? Who else did he beat? He KO'd a guy with a front kick to the face back in the day in his UFC career. I don't remember who that was. He has 2 wins over Jan Cutelaba, but Jan Cutelaba never was really good. He has double-digit losses. So it's like, if you guys have an underrated win for Magomed Ankalaev, let me know, because I didn't personally have one. I'm not trying to be a hater, but I genuinely don't think any of his wins are underrated. And people would say the Alex Pereira win. I don't think that win was underrated, because everybody expected him to run through Alex Pereira. Like, it felt like 80% of people were picking Magomed Ankalaev. I picked Alex Pereira, but it felt like 80% of people, 70% of people were picking Ankalaev to run through Pereira. They said his wrestling would be too much. They said that he would KO Pereira or just easily out-grapple him and submit him. So, yes, I think that truly Ankalaev doesn't have any underrated wins in his career. Moving on to Alexander Volkanovski, the featherweight GOAT, the guy who just got his title back over Diego Lopez. His most overrated win, in my opinion, is going to have to be the Korean Zombie. Listen, I'm sorry, but this fight should have never happened. Korean Zombie should have never got a title shot against Volk. Korean Zombie was so far past his prime whenever he fought Volk. Like, he was probably like 4 or 5 years removed from his prime. And Volk showed levels, obviously, like he was supposed to do. But the reason I say this win is overrated isn't because of Volk's performance. It's because of how people glaze this on Volk's resume. They always do this. They're like, oh, yeah, dude, he has the wins over Max Holloway, Brian Ortega. Oh, and he has the win over TKZ. That was a good win. It's like, no, the win over TKZ barely counts for anything. That was TKZ way past his prime. The skeleton of TKZ, that was an easy win for Volk. There was no chance in hell TKZ was going to do anything to Volk. He was never going to submit him. He was never going to KO him. This was literally a tailor-made matchup to Volkanovski to run through and destroy TKZ. And that's exactly what he did. I'm not trying to disrespect Volkanovski, but I think that whenever people talk about Volk's resume, they glaze the TKZ win a little too much. They throw it in there a little too much and give him a lot of credit for it. It's like, dude, it's TKZ when he's, 35 years old? It ain't that impressive, buddy. Volkanovski has way better wins. And when you talk about his most underrated win, listen, I think it's the third fight against Max Holloway. People are so used to saying that Volkanovski beat Holloway 3 times that they forget how badly he destroyed Max Holloway in the third fight. He put an absolute boxing domination on Max Holloway in that third fight. Like, that was one of the most brutal beatdowns I've ever seen Max Holloway take. Wait, actually, my bad. It was the most brutal beatdown Max Holloway's ever seen. And the reason this win is so underrated, because it's one thing to beat Max Holloway, narrow out, eke a decision out like Volk did in the second fight, or, in the first fight. It's one thing to beat Max Holloway by a close decision like maybe Poirier did. It's one thing to finish Max Holloway like Dustin Poirier did earlier in his career, like Ilia Poirier did. Very impressive, by the way. It's one thing to do those things. Max Holloway's a hard guy to finish. But to beat Max where he's best over a 5-round decision and destroy him in every single moment in that fight, Max Holloway got a cut over his eye in the third fight versus Volk, and Volkanovski just ran away with that fight, and literally 50-45 Max Holloway. He destroyed Max Holloway, and no one else has ever been able to do that against Max Holloway. Even Ilia Topuria arguably lost rounds against Max Holloway despite knocking him out later in the fight. Dustin Poirier lost rounds against Max Holloway. and that was a closer fight than people remember. But Volkanovski in that third Max Holloway fight absolutely destroyed him and made it look easy. It made it look like Max Holloway didn't belong in there with him and shut all the claims down that the second fight was a robbery. So I think that Volkanovski's win versus Max Holloway the third time is his most underrated win, because not a lot of people talk about how he dominated Max over 5 rounds and made it look easy. Whenever Max is a guy that typically does well over the 5 rounds, is able to build momentum and beat guys over that. Moving on to Tom Aspinall, the interim, but let's be real, the real heavyweight champion. Who is Tom Aspinall's most overrated win? Listen, I think it's Sergey Pavlovich. And I think the reason this win is glazed more than it should be is because Pavlovich was on a 6-fight win streak before he was facing Tom Aspinall. But against who, you know? His best win in that win streak was against who? It was against, who was it? He knocked out Curtis Blades. That was Pavlovich's best win in that 6-round, first-round KO streak. Sorry, I butchered that, but you get what I'm saying. Pavlovich was getting glazed. He was on a 6-fight win streak, all knockouts in the first round. And Tom went in there on 2 weeks' notice and was able to finish him. And I think if you look at Sergey Pavlovich now and how he's kind of gotten exposed by Tom and then Volkov, and he kind of resorted to grappling against Rosenstruik, it's very clear that Sergey Pavlovich is a very one-dimensional striker. He's a slugger, and whenever his slugging doesn't work and he gets picked apart on the outside, or he's able to fight a guy who has more speed than him, he kind of just folds and gets pieced up like he did against Volkov, or he gets knocked out like he did against Aspinall. So knowing Sergey Pavlovich's skill set, I do think that the Tom Aspinall win over him is a little bit overglazed and overrated. Tom Aspinall has better wins, in my opinion. I think Tom Aspinall's win over Curtis Blades is more impressive than his win over Sergey Pavlovich. I think his win over Volkov, which I'm going to label as his most underrated win, is better than Sergey Pavlovich. Listen, Alexander Volkov I don't think he's ever been submitted in the UFC outside of Tom Aspinall. Tom Aspinall went in the fight in a main event in London and made it look easy against Volkov. He twisted Volkov into a pretzel. And let me just say, nobody does that to Volkov. Derek Lewis might get a fluke knockout against Volkov in the last 11 seconds. You know, Cyril Gane might get a robbery win over Volkov. But to go out there, outstrike Volkov, take him down, and then hit him with an arm lock and submit him when nobody else has done that, it was extremely impressive. And I think this really introduced to the world how good Tom Aspinall's grappling really is. Because like I said, who does that to Volkov? Nobody does that to Volkov. So a lot of people forget that Tom Aspinall even fought Volkov. And yeah, it should be Volkov versus Aspinall for the vacant championship, because we all know the fight against Cyril Gane was a robbery and Jon Jones is never fighting Aspinall. But nonetheless, I think his most overrated win is Sergey Pavlovich, and his most underrated win is Alexander Volkov for me. And moving on to the final guy on this list, Jon Jones. Who is his most overrated win? By far, not even a question. His most overrated win is Cyril Gane because of the narratives. Dude, especially by Dana White. Dude, Jon Jones takes off 3 years, comes back and destroys Cyril Gane, makes it look easy. Well, first of all, hold up. This was a tailor-made matchup for Jon Jones to win. A guy at heavyweight with little to no knockout power. He has to build on his momentum and knock you out. And a guy with no grappling. We're talking about a guy in Cyril Gane who was getting out-grappled by by Francis Ngannou. Let's be real, guys. Francis Ngannou doesn't really have grappling. He built anti-defensive wrestling, or anti-wrestling, or good defensive wrestling later in his career, shown in the Stipe rematch. But let's be real, dude. Francis is not known for his grappling. And the fact that Cyril Gane was just able to lay down under Francis Ngannou in rounds 4 and 5 and kind of just get sat on and not be able to do anything about it kind of showed where his grappling level was at. This was a tailor-made fight for Jon Jones to go out there and destroy Cyril Gane. I thought this was one of Jon Jones' easiest fights to pick. I picked Jon Jones to dispatch of Cyril Gane in the first round. And that's exactly what he did. I don't see how anybody thought that Cyril Gane was going to beat Jon Jones. I think people were riding on to the narrative that, oh, Jon Jones has been out for 3 years. He's going up to a weight class he's never fought at. Cyril Gane's going to give him issues. No, that was all a bunch of BS. Jon Jones' easiest fight at heavyweight was already going to be Cyril Gane, at least to win the belt, not Stipe. Sorry, guys, I'm waffling. But I think the easiest fight for Jon Jones to win the belt against an elite opponent at heavyweight was always going to be Cyril Gane. And a harder matchup would have been Tom Aspinall, a Sergey Pavlovich. Who else? Who's going to be harder to take down because Sergey Pavlovich is massive. A Tom Aspinall, a Gelton Almeida. Even a Curtis Blades would have been harder than Cyril Gane. Cyril Gane was probably the easiest fighter to beat at heavyweight. That's not to say that Cyril Gane didn't deserve to fight Jon Jones for the title. He was obviously the next best guy behind Francis, given the rankings and his performances. But I think that Jon Jones gets so much glaze over this win, and when in reality, it wasn't that impressive. He beat a guy that didn't have grappling. Okay, that's what Jon Jones is supposed to do. I get it was at a division he never fought at, but its reality is Jon Jones had a grappling advantage, and we all should have saw that going in. And his most underrated win in my opinion, is Glover Teixeira. If you guys do not remember, Jon Jones fought Glover Teixeira all the way back 8 years before Glover won the title at UFC. I forgot what UFC it was. But he fought Glover Teixeira whenever Glover was on a 22-fight win streak, I believe. 22-fight win streak. And Jon Jones 50-45 Glover Teixeira. Who does that to Glover Teixeira? Who 50-45s him, beats him up into stand-up, and just, listen. People forget, man, in his prime, before old man Crafty Teixeira came around, he had really good boxing and knockout power. Teixeira was knocking out everybody on his come up before he lost to Jon Jones, before he lost to Rumble Johnson. He was on a tear, man. He was undefeated for a long time, going on this over a 20-fight win streak. And Jon Jones dispatched up in 50-45, made it look easy. And I think that's Jon Jones' most underrated win. And not to mention, it aged well because Glover Teixeira broke through at age 42 to become the UFC light heavyweight champion and one of the oldest champions in UFC history. So I think that win has aged well on Jon Jones' resume. And I think that Glover Teixeira is a far better win on his resume than Ciryl Gane. And yeah, guys, this is, in my opinion, every single champion, current champion in the UFC's most overrated and underrated win. If you guys enjoy this kind of videos, do me a favor and drop a like on the video. Also, subscribe to the channel if you are new or you enjoy my content. I appreciate you guys. I'm out. Peace.